So we hope these webinars are useful to all of you. And it's the opportunity, of course, to ask questions. So I have a few slides to give you an overview of the Youth Promotion Initiative, why we're doing it, who can apply and how, etc. And then we'll delve a little bit into the type of interventions that PBF is interested in supporting in terms of youth and peace building. And then we should have plenty of time for Q&A. So, how can I move to Okay, so first, just as a way of background on why are we doing a youth promotion initiative. As I assume most of you know, in December of 2015, the Security Council of the United Nations adopted a resolution for youth, peace and security, Resolution 2250. This resolution is important because it's the first resolution that's fully dedicated to recognizing that young people and young men play a positive role for peace. And before that, the Security Council had actually pretty rarely addressed the question of young people in relation to peace and security, and sometimes with a slight tendency to associate young people to violence, and particularly in recent years to violent extremism. So Resolution 2250 is really important because it changes the narrative of young people in association to violence to recognize young people as active contributors to peace. Some of you must be familiar with Resolution 1325, which is a resolution on women, peace and security, which was adopted in year 2000. Very similarly, Resolution 2250 on youth, peace and security, and Resolution 1325 on women, peace and security. The younger sister, the younger brother, because it's really about the inclusivity of peace building. It's very much about recognizing the role of civil society in peace processes beyond government and other official actors. The last thing I want to mention as way of background is that it's very important to recognize that Resolution 2250 is not a resolution on countering violent extremism. It includes language on countering violent extremism because we know it's very high on the international agenda. Okay, so give us just a second. We see that some of you have a problem hearing us. Okay, so I'll continue. Please use the chat box if you still have problems hearing us. So I was just saying that it's important to recognize that Resolution 2250 is not a resolution on violent extremism. It addresses the question of violent extremism, but it really is a resolution around young people's positive contribution to peace, including their role in preventing violent extremism. So, do you know where sorry, we see that some of you still have problems. Do we have a?
Yeah, we tried that.
It helps.
We didn't.
No, I can just go grab mine. I have my.
Yeah. Excuse me. We're pausing this for a moment. Could you please let us know if you hear us? Okay, so some of you can hear us fine, apparently. Most of you, actually. Okay, so we're getting the feedback that most of you can hear us well. Some of you cannot hear us. So for those who cannot hear us, please check your settings on your computers. Okay, and also please make sure to mute your microphones. Most of us can hear it. Yes. So.
Okay, great. So I'll continue. So
Yeah.
So the PBF decided to launch the one before. Thank you. PBF decided to launch the Youth Promotion Initiative very much as a contribution to support the implementation of Resolution 2250, because the Peacebuilding Support Office, where PBF is located, was very involved in supporting this policy shift in understanding the positive role of young people. So PBF, for whom young people have always been a very key and central stakeholders and target group of a lot of our programs. So PBF decided to really support the implementation of the resolution with this dedicated initiative on youth, the Youth Promotion Initiative. As most of you know, I think, this is the second time that this exceptional funding window is open. The very first Youth Promotion Initiative took place last year in 2016, and a little later on in the presentation, I will just go back to what happened last year and share some lessons from that. And one thing I want to highlight, so today's webinar is just dedicated to the Youth Promotion Initiative. As you know, the GYPI is basically a double funding window. There's a funding window on gender and there's one on youth. They are separated, but they're very much interconnected. First, because they follow the exact similar process and timeline, but also, and I will go back to that later, because we're really keen on seeing, particularly as part of the projects that will be submitted on youth, a very strong gender dimension. So that's something to keep in mind as you develop your project. We'll get back to that. Okay. So, continuing with a little bit of the background. So you have this information in the call for applications that you also, but I just wanted to get back to it briefly on the objectives of the Youth Promotion Initiative. So for PBF, the objectives of the YPI are first to strengthen the participation of young people in peace-building processes. And in all of the countries where you can apply under the Youth Promotion Initiative, the Peacebuilding Fund has a portfolio of projects, sometimes very developed and for already a number of years. Sometimes PBF's presence or support is more new, but all of these countries are countries where PBF is supporting peace-building projects, and we're really keen on seeing a greater involvement of young people in the peace-building project, including within the type of interventions that PBF is already supporting. So one first thing that it's important for you to understand as you start looking at your project, please investigate, and you can find all this information on the PBF website. Look at what PBF has funded in your country already, and see how you can add and build young people's participation within the priorities that have been identified for the Peacebuilding Fund. The second objective is to support innovative projects, to really support young people's empowerment, young people's participation, and of course, because it's the Peacebuilding for which are among the objectives of the PBF. But the PBF has this great advantage of being a fund that can take risks. So we are interested in innovative projects. We are interested if you propose something that might be new, but you think this could be an interesting approach, just make a strong case for it, and there will be openness for something that's innovative and different from what's been traditionally done for youth programs, for instance. Another objective of the Youth Promotion Initiative is to support youth-driven civil society organizations. As the Peacebuilding Fund, we cannot fund directly local grassroots um, organizations. It will only fund organizations that meet like financing, reporting, but we're very keen on seeing how our funding and our support trickle down to grassroots youth organizations. And it is actually a requirement that you demonstrate at least 40% of your budget will go to national and local civil society organizations. Another objective, excuse me, another objective is to contribute, because the youth peace and security field is still a fairly recent field. Of course, there are many decades of youth programming, overall youth development, but on peace and security, the field is newer. So with this initiative and with the second initiative coming so closely after the first one, we're really also interested in learning what works and what doesn't work in terms of youth and peace building. So there's a strong focus on operational learning, which is why all projects are required to have a final evaluation. So we can really look at what worked, what didn't work, what should be replicated, and maybe what shouldn't. And the last objective, I said that already, is to support the implementation of 2250. So who can apply? I'll go through this very quickly. It's in the guidelines, but just to repeat it so everyone is on the same page. Civil society organizations can apply directly. You can submit 2 projects under the youth window for the entire initiative. The minimum amount is 300,000. The maximum is 2 million in US dollars. And for UN country teams, there's a limit of 2 proposals per country team under the GYPI window. The minimum for projects are 800,000 and the maximum is 2 million. Very importantly, we encourage joint projects, ideally for us 2 entities, possibly 3, but definitely no more. We've not had good experience with projects that involve too many entities, so we do really recommend 2 entities, possibly 3. And as I mentioned, very importantly, for all projects, we will want to see how 40% of the budget goes to national civil society organizations. Okay, so my next slide, which will come up in a minute, is for the list of eligible countries. I assume you've seen all of that, so I'll be moving to now the second part of the presentation, which is about which type of interventions will the Peacebuilding Fund support under the Youth Promotion Initiative. So as I mentioned, the field of youth and peace building is newer, at least we feel this very strongly compared to the field of gender responsive peace building. And we saw it last year. When we did the first youth promotion initiative at the same time of our third gender promotion initiative. We felt that overall the quality of proposals that we received under the gender window were stronger than the proposals that we received under the youth window. And this is also demonstrated by the fact that PBF ended up funding more projects under the gender window than the youth window. We just felt that there was a greater body of programmatic experience and operational learning, which I just mentioned, on women's participation in peace building, while for the field of youth, clearly there was less of a depth of programmatic experience that could be built on for this initiative. So from PBF, because PBF supports peace building processes that are ultimately very political, we're interested in supporting young people as political actors in peace building processes. And for us, this is a key angle. It's similar for our gender window, where we're very interested to support women as political actors in peace building processes. We will be interested in proposals that really focus on young people's ability, participation, on the peace building process, not necessarily at the national level. It was yeah, sorry about that. So not only for national level peace building processes, even though we will be particularly interested in these national level efforts, which are typically the ones that we are engaged in supporting, but also peace building efforts at a more, it can be a sub-regional level, or right now the community level, but we will want to see the possibility of impact on the broader political process. So this is the next slide is a quick overview of the projects we supported last year. There are 3 projects. One is a UN project that was done by UNDP and I believe UNIDO, and it was a project in Guinea about so it was mixing security issues and employment issues for young people. And the project aimed at training a small group of young people in a high, how do you say, high qualifying, high skill, thank you, high skill job, which is about setting up these lights. Okay, I don't have the technical terms exactly, but that was supporting the being set in place between the youth population and between the local police and the local security forces. So that's actually the only UN project that was selected last year under the GYPI. The 2 other projects were projects by NGOs. In Kyrgyzstan, Search for Common Ground, a project on young people as agents of peace and stability.
Apparently. Can you please let us know if you can hear us? Okay, so the explanation of the project, maybe if you could do that again, the connection.
Okay, well, just very quickly, the project in Guinea was mixing a focus on security with young people, facilitating dialogues between young people and the police and local security mechanisms, and the putting up lighting in areas of Conakry that were very high risk in terms of crime, etc. So a group of young people got a high-skill training, or are in the process of getting a high-skill training for this, this lighting system. I can't remember. I remember in French called photovoltaic. I have no idea how you say that in English, but anyway, it's a high skill. That was given to, yes, solar, thank you. No, it wasn't solar, but anyway, so it was, what we found interesting with this project, it had a focus on helping with the security of the city. It was putting young people in touch with the local security forces and the police and facilitating that dialogue. It had an employment dimension, which is typically not something we're looking at with a measure of questioning, and I'll go back to the question of employment later. But the fact that this was a high-skill training and it was linked to it was really giving them a qualification that we were hoping they could use later. Anyway, so that's why we selected this project. It's a UNDP and UNIDO training in Guinea-Conakry. The 2 other projects that were funded last year under the Youth Promotion Initiative were NGO projects. One is Kyrgyzstan, where Search for Common Ground proposed a project on young people as agents of peace and stability that had a strong focus on supporting young people's leadership and their organizations, etc., and facilitating their dialogue with elders and political stakeholders. And for us, that dimension of also facilitating young people's access to decision makers and other stakeholders is something that we're also very interested in. Very often we see proposals that are only focused on training young people and that are very much just about training. But it's hard for us to see what's going to be the peace building impact when the focus is exclusively on young people, and the project also doesn't use the opportunity to facilitate their access to other platforms and to stakeholders and decision makers. So also something to keep in mind as you're working on your project. The last project that was selected last year was by the NGO Accord in Mali, and it was about young people's engagement in the peace process in Mali, with a specific focus on countering violent extremism in northern Mali, where it's a big issue. I cannot tell you much more on these projects because the implementation has actually started only recently to finalize all the administrative agreements, etc., the funds to be transferred. So we are not yet in a process where we can tell you how well these projects have done. What I can tell you is that we're looking at them very closely. We're very interested in their results. And yes, they're ongoing. All good? Okay. So I have just a couple more slides. So to share some of the lessons learned from last year's Youth Promotion Initiative, which were the successful proposals. So as you see, there weren't many successful proposals. We had to reject many proposals, and many of them actually shared common limitations. The first one was that a lot of the proposals did not seem to have been discussed, consulted in any form or way with young people and youth organizations. And that's something we want to make sure that what you're proposing and that we might end up funding is something that has been discussed, conceived, and thought about with the young people and the youth organizations that we want to support. We're really interested in supporting young people's agency and the role of their organization. So we want to make sure whatever you propose is actually coming from young people being directly involved in the assessment of priorities, strategies, and interventions. Many of the proposals we received last year didn't explain how they'd been consulted with youth organizations. So that's one very important dimension to keep in mind. Another limitation of many of the proposals last year is that they talked about young people without saying who were the young people and how they would be identified. So we had many proposals that talked about young people as if all the young people in, Mali were the same, as if there were no young women and no young men, no one was urban or rural, no one has any ethnic affiliation, religious affiliation, etc., etc. We are very interested in hearing from you which young people you are aiming to work with, why them, what is your access to them, how they've been involved in your conception of the project. So that should be something for any proposal that's submitted under the Youth Promotion Initiative. There should be at least a very solid paragraph telling us who are we talking about and what is the advantage of your organizations in working with these young people specifically. Another challenge that we saw is that a lot of the projects that we received actually were not able to demonstrate that they had the potential of any peace building outcome. And we're the Peacebuilding Fund, so the only interventions we can fund are interventions that aim at building peace. What it means concretely is that proposals that aim at strengthening, providing employment to young people or strengthening youth organizations, for us, it's not these outcomes. They need to be formulated as peace building. You need to demonstrate that what you do ultimately contributes to building peace in this country. We cannot fund interventions that aim at primarily often the ultimate outcome is about the strengthening of the organizations. We are interested in seeing how that will eventually be linked to building peace.
Yeah, I think a little bit later in this webinar series, we will go over the sort of importance of theories of change. But just to highlight, I think the part of what Cecile is getting at is that whatever we are funding needs to be sort of grounded in a clear conflict analysis or a scenario that sets the stage for us to understand what the conflict factors, drivers, triggers are that the project will try to tackle, and that the theory of change explains how the intervention is going to actually start moving the dial a little bit on that particular driver of conflict or trigger. And in that way, we can actually understand how, even if it is employment, for example, as in the case of Guinea, it was clear that through the theory of change and linking back to the conflict analysis, that by our supporting employment, we were actually helping to address a measure of instability. We were helping to increase citizens' confidence within communities in this sort of, peace building mode. And so we were able to read into the project document what the peace building outcome is. And I think that all comes through sort of referring back to conflict analysis through the theory of change. Thanks.
Thanks, Tammy. So a couple more points on lessons learned from last year. So in terms of sectoral focus, we received, I think the majority of the proposals we received, at least a very significant number of proposals, were focused on employment. And very often, based on the theory of change, that poverty is what, and lack of employment is what is driving young people into violence. Therefore, we should provide employment to young people so they don't become violent, which to us is an actually unsubstantiated assumption about the relationship between poverty and lack of employment and violence. There is actually pretty extensive evidence that what is driving people in general, including young people, into violence is typically much more complicated than only the question of economic opportunity. And certainly an employment approach to peace building, the evidence of results of peace building impact of employment programs is to this day very limited. As PBSO, we did a review of our employment programs in collaboration with other UN partners that showed that the actual peace building outcomes are very difficult to demonstrate if they exist at all. So, as I've mentioned before, we did end up funding a program, the UNDP UNIDO program in Guinea, that had an employment dimension. But because this one was done in a way that to us was more interesting, because it also linked security issues, it had this high-skill training, etc. But very often we see proposals for short-term employment for young people that's giving them no skills that will end with the program, etc., with the assumption that this will help build peace in the country, which to us means to go back to Tammy's point, that the theory of change is flawed. So before you start, please don't jump into ideas around youth and employment without really carefully thinking about it. We tend to see these proposals. For us, they're not the top priority. The other dimension, of course, is that our funding is limited. So there's only as much you can do in terms of employment, even regardless of the question of peace building, with $1 or $2 million. So to us, it tends to not be a first priority in terms of what we want to support. Another big chunk of the projects we received were projects that were focused on sports for young people, cultural activities, which we're not at all against by principle. But here again, you need to demonstrate how it's going to have an impact on peace building. Because we saw a lot of proposals that were proposing basically recreational activities for young people, but there was no link that was made to social cohesion, bringing
divided groups together, helping, living together again, etc. It was very much about, we'll do a nice summer camp for young people, but for us, again, if it doesn't have a peace building dimension, then we cannot support it. And last but not least, also going back to the point Tammy was doing, the importance of grounding your project. So particularly projects that are looking at young people as political actors, engaged citizens, it needs to be based on a sound conflict analysis and also a sound political analysis of what's happening in the country. We have seen in the past a proposal coming from a country where things were really getting extremely tense in relation to elections. People were in the street, they were young people, they were youth wings of political parties, etc. We received a proposal about youth and peace building in this country that made no mention of this political situation, where things, it was on the front page of the newspapers, but the project seemed to be entirely dissociated from the political realities of the country. So for us, that's a very big, that it's not possible for us to support a project like that. So grounded in an analysis of what's happening in the country, on the political analysis, a conflict analysis, and really think of the peace building outcomes. Okay, so this is, I think, my last, oh no, I have 2 more slides. So very quickly on this one, we have some resources that were developed by the Peacebuilding Support Office and its partners on youth and peace building. Please have a look at them. You will, when you receive, so the PowerPoint will be available on the website for the GYPI, and you can access these resources by clicking on the links. You have the guiding principles on young people's participation in peace building, and maybe the most useful would be the practice note, which reviews programs and promising practices of engaging young people in peace building. It's organized by sectoral areas, provides concrete examples. So that might be a good resource. You should also look at the Youth for Peace.info website, which is the primary platform for all documents and discussions around peace and security. So you can also find plenty of resources. Okay, and this is really the last substantive point I wanna make. So you should keep in mind what the PAC means, the Project Appraisal Committee. So it will be the group of people, they will all be from PBSO, coming together and reviewing the proposals. And these are the criteria that we will use to review these proposals. Your proposals. Remember, they're also spelled out in the call for application, so you have them. So really keep them in mind as you work on your project. So our first criteria would be the link to peace building, and I've already discussed that quite a bit. Remember that PBF has 4 priority areas. You need to be able to demonstrate how your project falls under one or several of these priority areas. They're all in the guidelines. Another criteria for the review of the proposals will be looking at how the project is leveraging commitment and action from partners and institutions on youth and peace building, meaning we're happy to support the work of youth organizations, help with their strengthening and their training, but we're really interested in supporting as much as possible institutional change. So looking at how the proposal will help also supporting a change in the way national partners, government institutions, national institutions engage and look at young people in relation to peace will be very important. I mentioned before that we will be looking at how the project has been consulted with partners, including local partners. So evidence of a bottom-up approach in the way the project itself has been conceived. We'll be looking at a clear theory of change. Tammy mentioned it, and again, we'll have a dedicated webinar in 2 weeks on that. We will be looking at how interventions are focused. So rather than a proposal that's looking at, too many sectors and too many areas of intervention, we will prefer that you focus on one specific area and go deeper. So rather than focus on young people as political actors in the upcoming elections, but also recreational activities for young people, a little bit of employment, and maybe some organization strengthening, we would rather you decide to focus on one of these areas and go deeper, because again, we have limited time. We can have more impact with projects that are more focused rather than with projects that sprinkle too many areas of intervention. You will be looking at the value for money of the interventions you propose. And last but not least, we will be looking very closely at projects, how do your projects mainstream a gender dimension. We did see last year, actually it should be in my lessons learned, a lot of the proposals that we received were gender blind. They only talked about young people. It didn't talk about the difference between young men and young women. It just never addressed the fact that the situation might be different for young women than for young men. It never addressed gender norms. It never addressed the fact that security issues might be different for young women than they are for young men. And that was for us an exclusionary factor. We will only fund projects that fully mainstream gender, that are at least a gender marker too. That's one of the things you need to provide. You need to score your project, demonstrate to us how it's fully mainstreaming gender. So on the last slide, you just have the dates of the upcoming webinars. I mentioned them at the beginning. Remember that the deadline for the applications is July 7th. We will only take applications online. There is no Word template and the only way to provide your application is using the website. So thank you so much, and now I guess we'll take questions.
So please, participants, if you have questions, you can send them to us through the chat function in either English or French. We received one question, I think Cecile already answered this, regarding whether or not there would be a Word template or such as a concept note this year. This is not the case. The only way that we will accept applications is through the online application system. However, if you want to have a look at what is actually going to be required from you and what information we will be asking, please download the guidance note, which is available in English and in French on the www.pbfgypi.org website under the resource section.
Okay, so we have a few questions that are arriving. I will take them in order. So the link to the recorded version of this webinar will be on the website for the GYPI. The link to last week's webinar is already up, as well as the presentation. So that's where it will be. And the PowerPoint will also be in French. And you will find all of these links and PowerPoint presentations under the resource section.
Flexibility around the eligibility.
Okay, so give us just a second. No, wait. Around registration country in Myanmar. So there's a question about, so one of the criteria that is spelled out in the application note is that you need, as a civil society organization, to be registered in the country for which you're applying. So there's a question here about Myanmar and how difficult it is for international NGOs in particular to get registration officially. So that's a question that was raised to us before. We're looking into it because we understand that there's a specific situation in Myanmar. So we are discussing with our administrator, which is a multi-partner trust fund, to find out what can be the flexibility the flexibility here. So I'm sorry, I don't have an answer yet, but we're looking into it, and we've been the question's been raised to us before. Word limit for the applications, yes. Oh, there is no word limit. Okay, so there's no word limit for the application. Please use the online template, and no limitations. But yes, please, it's better. It's a better strategy to be concise. Remember that for us, we will receive most likely hundreds of proposals. So it's better to try to make a more concise case for what you're proposing to do, rather than be too detailed and lengthy. This is just the first step of the application process. So the project, for the project under the Youth Promotion Initiative, we're using one of our two windows. It's the immediate response window. So projects are for 18 months, not 1 year, 18 months total.
Gender marker.
So gender marker. PBF uses for all of the projects we fund a gender marker. So all of our projects are scored to assess how they're responsive to gender issues, how much they factor in a gender analysis in the background, how much they focus on gender issues in terms of their objectives and outcomes. Indicators are indicators disaggregated by sex, etc. So all the organizations that are proposing a project to PBF have to self-assess what they're proposing in terms of how good is it integrating a gender analysis and a gender focus. So there is the gender score is 0, 1, 2, or 3. 0 means that the project is gender blind. Any project that is scored gender 0 will not be funded by PBF. We do not fund projects that are gender blind. Gender marker 1 means that there is often very limited focus on gender, and that there are no dedicated interventions, no specific indicators, etc. We typically will also not fund gender marker 1 project. What we will fund are gender marker 2 projects that are gender marker 2 are projects that fully mainstream a gender dimension throughout the project, including through specific activities that are targeting possibly women only or men only, but that have a very strong gender dimension, that are maybe looking at addressing some, gender norms. It can be, working with male policemen on gender-based violence, and making sure they know how to attend to survivors of gender-based violence when they come to report a crime at the police station. So that for us would be a fully mainstream intervention that we would see very positively. Gender marker 3 are projects whose ultimate objective is gender equality. So it's not just that they're mainstreaming gender, it's that they're actually targeted project on gender equality. There is a guidance note on the gender, there's information on the gender marker on the PBF website. Please look it up for more specific information. So on the age definition of youth, as you know, there is no internationally agreed definition of the age range for young people. In the UN system, we often use the age range of 15 to 24, but it can also be 10 to 24 to also include younger adolescents. Resolution 2250 defines young people as 18 to 29. And in all of the countries where you work, I'm sure there are in any case very different definitions of youth. All this to say that we are not strict on the definition of youth, or we don't go by one definition specifically. But we will, part of what we're, when I discussed earlier the question of targeting, telling us, the age range of the young people you're aiming to work with is also something we will be interested. There is an overall tendency in the youth work to focus on older youth, just simply because it's typically easier to work with them. So we will be really appreciative of projects that are also targeting young people. So again, we're flexible on the age range, but please also think about younger young people. How
many countries in one application?
Okay, so all the PBF is a country-based funding mechanism, which means that all the projects have to come under one specific country. It makes cross-border projects a little bit complicated, not impossible, but a little bit complicated. Was it asked by the UN or NGO?
I'm not sure, but it applies to both.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would say by definition, if the question is regarding UN applications, given that among the countries that we have as eligible, every UN application must be accompanied and submitted through a letter of support and an application from the resident coordinator or the DSRST. Given that, it's difficult to imagine a scenario in which a UN application can be coming from multiple countries, because you simply would have to go through a competitive process successfully within UNCT of 2 different countries. Whether, so now we shift over to the NGOs. Are NGOs able to submit?
Okay.
So the rules around NGO applications are that any individual NGO has a limit of 2 applications for the gender promotion globally. Now, the question is, among those 2, can any be...
Please repeat.
Huh.
Okay, it's fine. Yeah.
Okay, so apologies if the sound was bad, but so just maybe to focus on the NGO case. If you are an NGO, as I was saying, you by definition are limited within the call for proposals to 4 applications in total, 2 for the Gender Promotion Initiative and 2 for the Youth Promotion Initiative globally. And the example I was using was, again, if you search for common ground, we will only accept a total of 4 applications, 2 for each initiative. The question, I think, then becomes, can an NGO submit one application that crosses or is addressing multiple countries that are within the eligible list of countries? We have a preference for applications that are addressing only one country, that do not seek to sort of spread the initiative across too many dimensions. As Cecile was saying, the funding is modest, and so we want to see the highest level of impact. There's also a sort of technical issue with our fund administrator, in that the funding must be attached to a country. So if you are successful in your application, in order to have the fund being transferred, your project must be registered and associated with one of our eligible PBF countries. And so there's just a practical matter. So all of which is to say, we don't actually have a rule against multiple country applications, but we recognize that we have some technical challenges around that, and there may be really good reasons around seeking higher impact to not go that route. So we would express a preference for single country proposals.
Thanks, Tammy. Okay, so there are a number of questions that came in. So I'm not going to address questions that, so all questions about attachment for application, eligible countries, etc. All of these are in the guidance note that is available on the dedicated website for the GYPI. So please refer to it. That's where you will find all the information. So there are questions around priority countries. So the 20 countries are that are eligible to apply are all equally priority. There is no prior among these. Countries that have received funding under the Youth Promotion Initiative last year are not less priority than other countries. So all 20 countries are equally eligible. We have not set aside an amount for the Youth Promotion Initiative, for specific countries, for specific UN versus NGO, etc. We will just make our decisions based on the quality of the proposals. We're aiming through the GYPI, so for both the gender and the youth windows, we're aiming to allocate up to $20 million US. In our experience, for the past several years where we've done these exceptional initiatives, we do not end up with good enough proposals to be able to allocate all of the money we're aiming to. So, and I'm highlighting that to really push all of you to say that there is a possibility, and for us, there is a possibility to allocate more funding than what we've been able to do so far. What it means concretely, so the maximum per project is 2 million. What it means concretely is that it's very likely that some countries that are eligible will end up not having any projects selected. That's what has happened in other years. We always had around 15 to 20 countries that were eligible, and only maybe half of these in the end received funding for a project. So again, we're not earmarking any specific amount for any specific sectoral intervention for any specific country. For UN versus NGO, it will all be based on the quality of applications.
Yeah. So there's a question about how quickly activities may start after the acceptance of an application or of a proposal. It's a good question. And this year, so maybe to reflect a little bit on how the past processes, if you've been involved in the Gender or Youth Promotion Initiative in the past, how it differs this year from past years. So in the past, we had much more of a sort of back and forth on improving quality in order to get to an acceptable proposal. So for example, the final decision for a number of projects last year in our project appraisal committee came to be a conditional approval of a given project. And the approval then was sort of conditioned on the meeting of certain improvements within the project document. And once PBF then received those improvements, then we would sign the project document and submit to our fund administrator for the fund transfer. We will not be undergoing that kind of process this year. We're moving much more into a sort of more traditional donor kind of role, and also the level of demand in terms of the proposals that we've received in the past make that kind of dedicated accompaniment through the proposal design stage untenable. We just simply don't have the human resources to be able to do that. So this year, when we go into our project appraisal committee, we will either be accepting fully the project or rejecting the project. There will be no conditional approval. And in that sense, once we make that final decision, we will send the signed project documents, the fully signed project documents, to our fund administrator, who typically needs 5 to 7 working days in order to make the transfer. The only caveat to that 5 to 7 day period for receiving the funds transfer is in the case of NGOs that have not been formally vetted before. by the MPTFO, our fund administrator. So if an NGO must be vetted in order to ensure that they are meeting the eligibility requirements for direct funding, they will have to undergo a process for that that will extend the period of time to receive the funds transfer, and I can't tell you what that is. It's in part dependent on the NGO's responsiveness to the requests for information, and in part dependent on MPTFO's ability to respond quickly. So if you are an NGO that has already been through this process, your case is much more similar to that of the UN agencies, funds, and programs, where you can expect a 5 to 7 day turnaround time. I hope that's clear. I just also wanted to add that from the last webinar until now, we've received a number of email questions directly to our staff here at PBF. We will not be addressing individual questions, even if it's on questions around technical eligibility of a specific NGO. We will not be doing that bilaterally through email questions. We would direct you, if you have a question, to the website, because chances are if you have a certain question, others may also have that question, and we won't be then addressing, 15, 20 separate questions from people, but rather just responding in a way that is generally useful for everybody and saving, being a little bit more efficient in our time. The address that you may send questions to is info, I-N-F-O, at, sorry, the PBF, GYPI.org. And that also, that email address is on all of the various strategic communications that we've been sending out. So hopefully it'll be clear what that address is. And Barith is now also typing it in the chat function. Thanks.
So there are also questions about eligibility of organizations. So can a consortium of civil society organizations in Canada apply to the GYPI? So the question is, you have all the eligibility criteria, and there's some eligibility criteria spelled out in the guidance note, and the rest is on the online form on the website. One of the requirements is that the organizations that are applying need to be registered in the country where they're proposing to intervene. So if the civil society consortium is only registered in Canada, that would make you not in possibility to apply to the funding window, because you need to be registered in the country where you apply. Similar response for the question about a regional network. At the end of the day, the funding will be going to one organization or a couple of organizations that need to comply with our requirements, and these requirements are spelled out in the concept note and in the in the application guidelines and on the website where you can apply. So you need to be complying with these requirements, including registration in the country you're proposing to intervene, to be able to be considered for the GYPI. Very importantly, you need to demonstrate that your organization is tax exempt. As the Peacebuilding Fund, we cannot fund organizations that are not tax exempt. And I'm highlighting that because that was an issue for some of the organizations, for some of the proposals that we had actually hoped to fund last year. It ended up that the organizations were not registered as tax exempt in the country or in their headquarters, and that was that made that we couldn't fund them. So please, before you embark into any substantive thinking on what you want to propose under this initiative, you have to make sure that you are actually eligible to receive funding by PBF. So please look at the guidance for that. You can submit your proposal in French or in English. So you can submit in French, that's fine. So an application from one UN agency have less chance than a joint application? Yes and no. It's not at all impossible to submit a proposal by yourself, but remember that you will need to get the endorsement from the resident coordinator. And chances are, in the UN country team, there are a number of entities that are willing to also compete for the GYPI. So you will need to get the support from the RC for your single agency proposal. And I think typically it's easier to get support for joint proposals, including at country level.
Maybe if I could add to that real quick, just on a side note, please be aware that joint proposals are not possible for civil society organizations, but only for UN country team members. In addition to that, we do encourage working with national and local counterparts, who would then be implementing partners and not receive directly the money from PBF, but through you as the recipient organization who's actually submitting the proposal.
Yeah, I think that last point that Brief is making about the distinction between what is a direct recipient and what is a partner is an important one to try to understand. So a joint proposal from an NGO, for example, from two NGOs, for example, would have both of them needing to meet the requirements of the eligibility for receiving funds directly. So it's, yeah, and that we will not accept. That model we will not accept. You may, however, have a sort of implementing partner relationship whereby one CSO is the direct recipient and the CSO that actually submits the project for the proposal, who may be working in partnership with another either INGO or nationally based CSO, where they are the ones that are then how to say, the fund recipient, the lead CSO is the direct recipient of the PBF funds, and then they make available through their approved project funding to their partner. At the end of the day, it's about who is accountable for the money, and it is everyone who is a direct fund recipient. And so just to recap, you may be in partnership, but it is an indirect partnership as far as the PBF funds are concerned. Yeah, so there's another question that if you are an INGO working with a local partner registered in country, does this meet the requirements to be registered in country? The answer is no. Again, back to the issue of who is the direct fund recipient. And the direct fund recipient must meet all of the eligibility requirements by themselves. And the sort of partnership with a local or nationally based CSO does not, in a way, cancel out that obligation.
So some other questions, starting with a quick one. There's no preference on the language that you will use for your application. If your proposal comes from a French-speaking country, it's absolutely your decision whether you want to submit the application or French or in English. There's no preference on our side. It won't have any impact in terms of the decision around. The three highlighted from the Youth Promotion Initiative last year, the Project Kyrgyzstan and Mali. These were the only 3 projects that were eventually selected under our first Youth Promotion Initiative. It wasn't just an illustration. This is the final list, which also really shows, I mean, we received hundreds of applications, including, I don't have the exact number of the youth proposals in front of me, but there certainly was at least a couple or 300 of applications on youth and peace building specifically. As you can see, we only ended up funding 3. What it means is that there's a very, very big number of applications that were disqualified because the organizations were not meeting the eligibility criteria. Hence, again,
your very first step should be to make sure you are actually eligible to apply. Otherwise, your project will be automatically excluded. So you shouldn't be losing time developing a project if you cannot receive funding from PBF. Then a lot of the proposals were excluded because they were not peace building proposals, they were employment proposals or proposals for youth, but they were not peace building proposals. And after that, there was a question of the quality of the proposal. So we ended up having to do this very drastic selection process. And to be honest, we actually ended up funding much less than what we had hoped. So we really are looking forward this year to receive better quality proposals, and we certainly hope to be able to support many more. In the PowerPoint that will be put on the website of the GYPI, that slide that lists the 3 proposals, after the title of the proposals, it says click here. If you click, it will take you to the NPTFO website. The NPTFO is our administrator, where you will find all the information about the projects, including the project proposals, etc., if you want to look at what we've funded before.
And maybe in addition to that, there was a question about how many projects we would approve in total. So I think we need to ask the question in a different way. It's not the number of projects that we will be limited by us, but it's more we do have 20 million in total that we will allocate for, or that we look to allocate for this initiative. And it is a highly competitive process, so please make sure that you submit high quality proposals, that you do use all the guidance that we are offering, that you do check out the website pbf.gyp.org. And as Tammy explained earlier, most of the questions should be answered in the FAQ section of the website. And if not, then please shoot us a message to info@pbf.gyp.org.
So there's a question on how can sport prevent violent extremism? We do not have the answer to that question. I think the entire world is wondering how we prevent violent extremism. But a couple of things to keep in mind. As I explained, our focus as a PBF is not countering or preventing violent extremism. Our focus is peace building. So we are interested in projects that will support young people's positive engagement around peace, rather than projects that aim at limiting the violence of young people. So something to keep in mind. We're absolutely willing to consider projects that have a focus on sports. It will be your job to demonstrate how it can have an impact on peace building specifically. There's also a question about whether we have a preference for, do you have any preference for a targeted youth group? So I'm not sure if you mean, do we have a preference for a specific type of youth groups from the PBF side? So that's not the case. We do have a preference for proposals that are very explicitly explaining who they will be targeting and why they're targeting this specific group of people. So part of the work you have to do for your proposal is to demonstrate who you're decided to target, why this group is important, who are they, how you're accessing them. But from our side, we don't have a preference for a youth-led local community group versus youth enterprise group. We are relying on what we trust that you, as the partners based in the countries, will know who best to prioritize. But you have to make that case to us.
In Guatemala.
Okay. So I think it might be the last question. So the 20 million are for both the gender and youth initiative. There is no amount that is set aside for youth or gender. So it might be 10 and 10, but it might not be. It all depends on the quality of the proposals. That is our main criteria. Yes, so the question of tax exempt is something that we learned through our first youth promotion initiative. It is a non-negotiable criteria for any organization to receive funding from the Peacebuilding Fund. Last year, the first youth promotion initiative was the very first time PBF was opening up for direct applications from organizations from civil society. So it also was a learning process for us and our fund administrator in terms of the essential criteria. So it turns out that the question of the tax exempt status is a non-negotiable one. You need to be registered as and tax exempt in the country where you're proposing to intervene. So with that, I think we've hopefully addressed the key questions. For many of the questions, the answers are all in the guidance notes. For the call for proposal, please refer to it. Please spend some time looking at the PBF, at the GYPI website. So there is a dedicated website that was put in place for the Gender and Youth Promotion Initiative, aiming to resources, etc. We really invite you to look at it closely. We hope it's been useful. Thank you for all the questions and for all the interest for this initiative. We're really looking forward to having a great pool of proposals this year. And you know, a lot of you are doing great work, so we're really looking forward to receiving your proposals. The next webinar will be on Wednesday next week. At the same time, it will be focused on gender. If you have any question, please use the info@pbfgypi.org email address. We will not, as Tammy mentioned, we will not be providing individual feedback on projects and ideas, but we can answer generic questions. Thank you, everyone. Good luck, and we'll talk to you next week.